At a table draped in white linen, surrounded by the low hum of expensive conversations, Marcus Thorne looked at his pregnant wife and delivered the final, polished stone of his cruelty. He thought the moment was his. He thought the power, the restaurant, the very air they breathed belonged to him. He didn't know that the quiet, unassuming man sitting at the far end of the table, the man he'd dismissed as Clara's retired schoolteacher father, was listening. More importantly, he didn't know that this simple man, James Harrison, could buy and sell the entire city block the restaurant stood on without checking his bank balance. Within 24 hours, Marcus Thorne's world, built on a foundation of arrogance and borrowed prestige, would be reduced to rubble. What he didn't know was that in his desperate climb to the top, he had just kicked the ladder out from under himself. We love a story where the arrogant get what they deserve, don't we? It's a tale as old as time. If you're ready to see this house of cards come tumbling down, do me a favor and tap that like button and subscribe for more stories just like this. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now let's go back and see how it all began. The foundation of their life together was, from the very beginning, built on a misconception. When Marcus Thorne met Clara Harrison, he saw a woman of quiet beauty and obvious intelligence, a talented architect with a portfolio that spoke of a keen eye for form and function. But he also saw a woman from a small town, with a simple, unnetworked family. He saw potential, but it was potential he believed he would be the one to unlock. He saw her as a beautiful, unpolished stone that he, with his social connections and driving ambition, could cut and set into a design of his own making. He loved her, or at least, he loved the idea of her as an accessory to the life he was so meticulously constructing. Clara, for her part, had seen something different in Marcus. She saw a man crackling with energy, a fierce desire to make his mark on the world. His ambition wasn't a flaw to her, it was a fire. She, who had always found her validation in the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly rendered blueprint, was drawn to his external, declarative drive. She believed his sharp edges would soften over time, that the core of the man was good, and that his obsession with appearances was merely a symptom of insecurity, a shell that would eventually fall away to reveal the person she thought she saw inside. She mistook his ambition for strength, his criticism for a desire to improve her, and his condescension for a form of worldly wisdom she simply hadn't acquired yet. They married in a modest ceremony, a concession Clara had insisted on, much to Marcus's chagrin. He had wanted a grand affair, a spectacle to announce his union, and by extension, his rising status at the financial firm where he worked as a mid-level analyst. "It's about showing people we've arrived, Clara," he'd argued, pacing their tastefully minimalist apartment. Tasteful and minimalist because Clara had designed it, though he took the credit when guests came over. "Arrived where, Marcus?" she had asked, her voice calm. "We're building a life, not staging a play." He had relented, but the argument became a blueprint for their future conflicts. Everything in Marcus's world was a performance. Every dinner party, every social engagement, every vacation was an opportunity to curate their image. And increasingly, Clara felt like a prop in his production. Her own career, once a source of immense pride, became a secondary plotline. She had won a prestigious award for a sustainable community center design just before they were married, a fact Marcus would occasionally bring up at parties, but he would frame it as a charming little hobby she had before the real work of supporting his career began. The unspoken truth was that Clara had been on the cusp of launching her own firm. She had the talent, the business plan, and though Marcus never knew it, the capital. Her father James had seen her meticulous proposal and offered to be her silent partner, her first and only investor. "You don't need my money, Clara," he had told her, sitting in her small office, his gaze sweeping over her designs with genuine admiration. "But it's there. It's a safety net. Go build your dream." But then came Marcus, and then came love, or what she believed was love. She put the firm on hold. It was a temporary pause, she told herself, a chance to build a foundation for their marriage before launching into the demanding life of a business owner. When she became pregnant a year later, the pause became a full stop. Marcus was ecstatic, not just for the child, but for the image. A beautiful, accomplished wife who had gracefully stepped back from her career to raise his heir. It was perfect. It fit the narrative he was writing. The condescension, once subtle, became more pronounced. It was in the way he'd dismiss her opinions on finance or politics. "Stick to your blueprint, sweetheart. This is complex stuff." It was in the way he'd critique her clothes before they went out. "That's a bit simple, don't you think? We're meeting the Vanderbilts. You need to look the part." It was in the way he spoke about her family. Her father, James Harrison, was a particular target of his soft-spoken scorn. James was a man of profound stillness and quiet intelligence. He had retired early, he'd told Marcus, after a modest career as a history teacher. He lived in a comfortable but unremarkable house 2 hours out of the city, drove a 10-year-old sedan, and wore clothes that were clean and well-kept, but utterly devoid of designer labels. To Marcus, James was the embodiment of everything he was trying to escape, a life of quiet mediocrity. He was polite to his father-in-law, but it was the strained, patronizing politeness one reserves for a doddering old relative. He never asked about James's life, his interests, his past. He had already categorized him and filed him away. A simple man, harmless, irrelevant. Clara saw the way Marcus treated her father, and it was a small, sharp pain in her heart each time. But she held her tongue. She did it for the peace of their home. She did it because she loved her husband and believed in the man he could be. And she did it because her father, with a quiet look or a gentle squeeze of her hand, signaled that he was fine. He was unbothered by Marcus's snobbery. It was like watching a small dog yapping at a mountain. The mountain does not care. It simply is. So Clara endured. She endured the small humiliations, the casual dismissals, the slow erosion of her identity. She poured her creative energy into their home, into preparing for their child, and into a secret project she kept locked away in the worn leather portfolio her father had given her years ago. The same one that had once held her dreams of an architectural firm. Now it held something else entirely, a different kind of blueprint, a plan for a different kind of structure, a future. The first major crack in the facade appeared during a visit from Marcus's mother, Eleanor Thorne. Eleanor was a woman cast from the same mold as her son, though where Marcus was sharp and modern in his ambition, Eleanor was brittle and old-fashioned in her snobbery. She saw the world as a rigid hierarchy of old money, new money, and no money. She had old money, or at least the fading remnants of it, and she guarded her social position with the ferocity of a dragon guarding a dwindling horde. To Eleanor, Clara was a lovely girl, but she was, regrettably, from the no-money category. Her son had married down, and while Clara was presentable, Eleanor never missed an opportunity to remind her of her station. This particular Saturday, Eleanor was visiting their apartment for lunch. Clara, now 5 months pregnant, had spent the morning preparing a meal she knew her mother-in-law loved. A delicate sea bass with a lemon caper sauce, asparagus, and a homemade sourdough bread she had learned to bake. The apartment was filled with the warm, inviting scent of fresh bread and citrus. Eleanor swept in, air-kissing Clara's cheek while her eyes performed a swift, critical scan of the room. "Darling, you look tired," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Pregnancy can be so draining. You must be sure to rest. Marcus needs you to be presentable for his upcoming corporate retreat." "I'm feeling wonderful, Eleanor, thank you," Clara replied, her smile unwavering as she gestured toward the dining table. "Please sit. Lunch is almost ready." Marcus, who had been on his laptop in the living room, strode over and kissed his mother properly. "Mother, you look stunning, as always." "Oh, you," Eleanor trilled, tapping his cheek. I just worry about you, my boy. You work so hard and you have so much on your plate. You need a partner who can keep up, who can help you build the right connections." Her eyes flicked to Clara, who was placing the platter of fish on the table. The implication was as clear as the crystal water glasses. Throughout the meal, Eleanor kept up a steady stream of passive-aggressive commentary. She praised the fish but then added, "You know, the chef at the club prepares it with a saffron infusion. It's simply divine. We must take you there sometime, Clara, so you can see." She commented on the beautiful tulips on the table, a gift from Clara's father, but noted that lilies would have been more formally appropriate for a lunch setting. Marcus, far from defending his wife, played along. He would nod, add his own little digs, and treat the conversation as a perfectly normal exchange. He was blind to the barbs, or worse, he saw them and considered them valid. The true moment of humiliation came during dessert. Clara served a simple but elegant raspberry tart. Eleanor took a small bite. "Lovely, dear. Very rustic." She placed her fork down. "Speaking of rustic, Marcus tells me your father is coming into the city next week for that big dinner with your boss." "Yes," Clara said, her posture stiffening slightly. "He's looking forward to it." Eleanor exchanged a look with Marcus, a quick, conspiratorial glance that made Clara's stomach clench. "Well," Eleanor said, dabbing her lips with a napkin, "do be sure he understands the dress code. It's a very exclusive restaurant. We wouldn't want him to feel out of place." "My father knows how to wear a suit, Eleanor," Clara said, her voice tight. "Of course, dear, of course," Eleanor said soothingly, which was more insulting than a direct attack. "It's just that people from different backgrounds sometimes don't understand the nuances of these things. The right tie, the right shoes. It all sends a message. And this dinner is so important for Marcus's career. We can't have any distractions." Marcus finally chimed in, placing his hand over Clara's. It was meant to look like a comforting gesture, but to Clara, it felt like a restraint. "My mother is just looking out for us, honey. You know how these things are. It's all about perception. Maybe you could gently suggest he wear that nice navy suit we saw in that picture?" The condescension was suffocating. They were talking about her father, a man of more quiet dignity and substance than the two of them could ever comprehend, as if he were a child who needed to be dressed for a party. The image they conjured of her gentle, intelligent father being an embarrassment was so profoundly offensive that Clara felt a hot surge of anger, but she held it in. She looked from Marcus's placating face to Eleanor's smug one. She thought of the baby growing inside her. What kind of family was she bringing this child into? A family that measured a man's worth by the brand of his shoes? A family that saw kindness and humility as liabilities? She took a slow, deliberate breath. "My father will be perfectly appropriate," she said, her voice low and even. "He is a man of great integrity. That is a quality that never goes out of style." Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Marcus just sighed, a theatrical exhalation of frustration. "Clara, don't be so sensitive. We're just trying to manage the situation." "There is no situation to manage," Clara said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than all of their loud pronouncements. She stood up from the table. "If you'll excuse me, I do feel a bit tired after all." She walked back to their bedroom, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't slam the door, she closed it softly. Inside, she went to her closet and pulled out the old leather portfolio. She ran her hand over its smooth, worn surface. It was a tangible link to her father, to a world where value was measured by character, not by a balance sheet. She opened it. Inside, nestled among financial reports and legal documents, was a small, framed photo of her and her father, smiling, standing on a windswept hill. They were wearing hiking boots and old sweaters. They looked happier and more real than anyone at that lunch table. She stared at the photo for a long time, the anger inside her slowly cooling, solidifying into something harder, clearer. It was resolve. The time for quiet endurance was coming to an end. The foundation of their life was indeed cracking, and she was beginning to realize she needed to be the one to decide what would be built in its place. The days leading up to the dinner with Marcus's boss, a senior partner named Mr. Abernathy, were a masterclass in Marcus's particular brand of controlling anxiety. The promotion he was vying for, Vice President of Acquisitions, was the culmination of years of relentless work and strategic sycophancy. This dinner was, in his mind, the final interview. Everything had to be perfect, and he appointed himself the sole arbiter of that perfection. He treated Clara not as his partner, but as a high-strung event coordinator he had reluctantly hired. He sent her a dozen emails a day with subject lines like urgent, floral arrangements, and confirmed wine selection. He had chosen the restaurant, Aurelia, known more for its exclusivity and price tag than its culinary innovation. He had pre-selected the menu, dictating what Clara and her father would be allowed to order. Abernathy is a traditionalist, Marcus explained, pacing their living room while Clara sat on the sofa, a book resting unread in her lap. We'll all have the filet. It's classic. It's safe. It shows we're serious people. My father is a vegetarian, Marcus, Clara reminded him for the third time that week. I told you that. Marcus waved a dismissive hand. He can have a salad, or the risotto. Just make sure he doesn't make a big deal about it. The last thing we need is him lecturing Abernathy on the ethics of animal husbandry. Clara felt a familiar weariness settle over her. It was a heavy cloak she had been wearing for months. My father has never lectured anyone in his life. He's the most unobtrusive man I know. Exactly, Marcus shot back, missing her point entirely. Let's keep it that way. Unobtrusive. Blends into the background. That's the goal for him. He stopped his pacing and looked at her, his expression softening into a look of strained affection. This is it, Clara. This is for us. For the baby. A VP salary will change everything. A bigger apartment, a summer house, the best schools. Everything I've been working for. He was trying to make her a co-conspirator in his dream, but the dream felt increasingly hollow. The summer house and private schools were not things she craved. She craved respect. She craved a partner who saw her, not a reflection of his own ambition. But she nodded, playing her part. I know, Marcus. I will make sure everything is perfect. While Marcus was busy micromanaging the dinner, Clara was managing something far more significant. Her secret project, the one contained within the leather portfolio, was reaching its final stages. During the day, while Marcus was at the office, her quiet apartment transformed into a command center. The phone calls were discreet, her voice calm and authoritative. Yes, Mr. Chen, she would say, looking over a complex spreadsheet on her laptop. The due diligence on their European subsidiary is complete. We've identified 3 redundancies in their executive structure that can be consolidated immediately post-acquisition. No, the valuation holds. They're over-leveraged, and their Q3 earnings report will reflect that. Our offer will look like a lifeline, not a hostile bid. She was speaking the language of Marcus's world, but with a fluency he could only dream of. The woman he thought was picking out tablecloths was, in fact, orchestrating a multi-billion-dollar corporate takeover. Her father, James Harrison, was her partner in this endeavor. The calls with him were different. They were a mix of business and paternal affection. Are you sure about this, sweetheart? James asked her during one of their evening calls, after she had recounted the latest incident of Marcus's condescension. We can pull the plug at any time. You don't have to go through with this dinner. You don't have to prove anything. Clara looked around the beautiful apartment that felt more and more like a gilded cage. She placed a hand on her swelling belly. I do, Dad. Not for him, not anymore, but for myself and for this baby. Her voice was firm. I need to see this through to the end. I need to understand the full scope of what I married. I need him to show me exactly who he is, with no restraint. And then, I need to show him who I am. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When James spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. He has no idea what a treasure he has. His loss, Clara. His profound and irreversible loss. He cleared his throat, his tone shifting back to business. The board has been briefed. The final vote is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. The funds are in escrow. Once the vote is confirmed, Harrison Holdings will be the majority shareholder of OmniCorp International. OmniCorp International, the parent company of the firm where Marcus Thorne was so desperate to become a vice president. "I'll see you tomorrow night, Dad," Clara said softly. "Wear the navy suit?" he asked, a rare note of humor in his voice. Clara laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound that felt foreign in the silent apartment. "Just the jacket. Wear it with your comfortable trousers. Let's give them something to talk about." The night of the dinner arrived, cloaked in a fine, misty rain that made the city lights blur into soft constellations. Marcus was a storm of nervous energy, adjusting his tie for the 10th time in the mirror, inspecting an imaginary piece of lint on his custom-tailored suit. He looked at Clara, who was standing by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. She was wearing a simple, elegant black dress that fell gracefully over her pregnant form. Her hair was pulled back, and her only jewelry was a pair of small pearl earrings. She looked serene, beautiful, and completely composed. "You look good," he said, his tone more of an assessment than a compliment. "Understated, appropriate." "Thank you, Marcus," she said, turning from the window. Her calmness seemed to agitate him further. "Are you ready for this? Do you understand what's at stake?" he pressed. "I understand perfectly," she replied, her gaze steady. Her father arrived a few minutes later. James Harrison entered their apartment, shaking the rain from his coat. He was wearing a well-made but unassuming navy blazer, a crisp white shirt, and a pair of simple gray trousers. He carried a small, worn leather portfolio under his arm. Marcus's eyes went immediately to the trousers, and a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He'd specifically told Clara a full suit was required. He shot her a look, but she met his gaze without flinching. "James, good to see you," Marcus said, his voice a little too loud, a little too hearty. "Glad you could make it. Ready for the big night?" "I wouldn't miss it," James said, his eyes finding Clara's. He smiled, a small, warm expression that was just for her. In that look, 1,000 volumes were exchanged. It said, "I am here. I am with you. You are not alone." In the car on the way to Aurelia, Marcus gave them a final briefing, as if they were soldiers about to enter battle. "Abernathy can be a bit gruff. Let him lead the conversation. Laugh at his jokes, but not too loudly. Show interest, but don't offer any strong opinions. And Clara, please, don't talk about architecture unless he specifically asks. It's boring." Clara said nothing. She simply stared out the window at the glittering, rain-slicked streets, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The quiet before the storm had a sound, she realized. It was the sound of her own steady heartbeat, a rhythmic countdown to a moment of irreversible change. The performance was about to begin, but Marcus had no idea he was not the one directing it. He was merely the lead actor in a play whose final act had already been written. Aurelia was exactly the kind of restaurant Marcus revered. It was a hushed cathedral of wealth, all dark wood, muted lighting, and waiters who moved with the silent, ghostly efficiency of specters. The air itself seemed to carry a price tag. Mr. Abernathy and his wife, a woman with a stiff, lacquered helmet of hair and a perpetually unimpressed expression, were already seated at a prime corner table. Marcus practically vibrated with sycophantic energy as he made the introductions. "Mr. Abernathy, Mrs. Abernathy, it is such an honor. This is my wife, Clara, and this is her father, Mr. James Harrison." Abernathy, a portly man with a face as florid as his personality, gave Clara a cursory nod and shook her father's hand without making eye contact. His gaze lingered for a moment on James's trousers and simple leather shoes before dismissing him entirely. He was, as Marcus had predicted, a man who judged a book by its cover, and James Harrison's cover read, "Bargain Bin Paperback." The initial conversation was stilted, dominated by Abernathy's pontifications on the stock market and his recent golf game. Marcus hung on his every word, laughing a fraction too loudly at his stale jokes and nodding with an intensity that bordered on spastic. Clara was a picture of poised grace, smiling politely, asking intelligent but unobtrusive questions about Mrs. Abernathy's charity work. She was playing the part of the perfect corporate wife so flawlessly that it infuriated Marcus. Her composure felt like a critique of his own desperate fawning. James Harrison, for his part, was a study in quiet observation. He said very little, listening with a placid, almost academic interest. He ordered the wild mushroom risotto, as Clara had suggested, and when Abernathy made a bluff comment about real men eating steak, James simply smiled and said, "This suits me just fine." His calm was a stark contrast to Marcus's frantic efforts to impress, and it seemed to needle his son-in-law. The turning point came when Abernathy, perhaps bored of his own monologue, turned his attention to Clara. "So, Marcus tells me you're an architect. Or you were," he said, a dismissive wave of his hand indicating her pregnancy. "Designed anything I would know?" Before Clara could answer, Marcus jumped in. "Oh, it was mostly small-scale stuff, community centers, residential projects. Very charming." He was trying to frame her career as a quaint hobby, something she had dabbled in before her real life, as his wife, began. But Abernathy's wife, whose name was Patricia, leaned forward with the first spark of genuine interest she'd shown all night. "Did you by any chance work on the design for the new lakeside pavilion at the Botanical Gardens? The one with the cantilevered roof?" Clara's eyes lit up. "I did. That was my last project before I stepped back." "It's breathtaking," Patricia said, her stiff demeanor softening. "Truly. The way it integrates with the landscape, it's a work of art. My garden club holds meetings there, and we all just marvel at it." Abernathy looked surprised, then impressed. "Is that right? Well, well, a hidden talent." He looked at Clara with newfound respect. A small, unfamiliar feeling coiled in Marcus's gut. It was jealousy. The attention was on Clara. The praise was for her. His boss was impressed not by his financial acumen, but by his wife's defunct career. This was not part of the script. He had brought her here to be a silent, beautiful accessory, and instead, she was stealing the spotlight. He felt a desperate need to regain control, to reassert his dominance in the narrative. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the pleasant conversation. "Well, she's all about babies and nurseries now," he said, patting her hand in a gesture that was meant to look affectionate, but was purely possessive. "Her designing days are behind her. She has a more important job now, supporting me." The table fell silent. The warmth from Patricia's praise evaporated, replaced by an awkward chill. Clara slowly withdrew her hand from under his. "I think a woman can be a mother and still have a professional identity, Marcus," Patricia Abernathy said coolly, her helmet of hair seeming to stiffen further in disapproval. Marcus felt a flush of panic. He was losing the room. He had to get things back on track. He decided to double down, to reestablish the hierarchy he so desperately needed. He turned his attention to Clara, his voice taking on a tone of mocking intimacy, as if they were sharing a private joke, though it was a joke aimed squarely at her. "Oh, of course. But let's be honest, honey," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "You were a small-town architect going nowhere. Your biggest client was the local library. Your career was a nice little dream. But this," he swept his arm around the opulent restaurant, "this is reality. This life we have, the people we know, the places we go. You have all of this because of me." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was stripping her of her past, her accomplishments, her very identity in front of these strangers. He was reducing her to nothing more than an extension of himself. Clara stared at him, her face a mask of calm. Inside, the last vestiges of her affection for him crumbled into dust. This was it. This was the man she had married. Not the ambitious go-getter, but a deeply insecure boy who had to diminish others to feel large. He wasn't done. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for the entire table to hear. He delivered the final, fatal blow, the words that would echo in the silent space he had created. "You're nothing without me," he said. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if stating an undeniable truth. "You and your simple little family, you're nothing." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Mrs. Abernathy gasped softly. Mr. Abernathy looked deeply uncomfortable, staring down at his plate. Marcus, seeing their reactions, seemed to realize he had gone too far, but the words were out, irrevocable. He looked smug and terrified all at once. And at the far end of the table, James Harrison, the simple, unobtrusive man, placed his fork and knife down on his plate with quiet deliberation. The small, metallic sound cut through the tension like a judge's gavel. He looked at Marcus, and for the first time all night, Marcus saw something in his father-in-law's eyes that wasn't gentle or placid. It was the cold, hard clarity of a diamond. It was the look of a mountain just before an avalanche. Clara did not cry. The time for tears was long past. A profound and terrible calm settled over her. The humiliation was complete. The performance was over. All that was left was the truth. She looked at her husband, the man who had just declared her a nullity, and she gave him a small, sad smile. It was a smile of pity, not for herself, but for him. He had no idea what was coming. She turned her head slowly, her gaze finding her father's. Their eyes met across the table, a silent and powerful current passing between them. In his look, she saw not anger, but a deep, sorrowful resolve. He had given Marcus every chance to be a better man, and Marcus had failed at every turn. "Dad," Clara said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the thick, awkward silence. "I think it's time." James Harrison nodded once, a short, decisive movement. He reached down beside his chair and lifted the worn, leather portfolio, placing it on the white linen tablecloth between the breadbasket and the water glasses. The thud was soft, but it resonated like a cannon shot in the quiet restaurant. Marcus stared at the portfolio, a flicker of confusion on his face. "What's this? Some of your old drawings?" "Clara, now is really not the time." "Be quiet, Marcus," James said. His voice was not loud, but it had a quality of command that made Marcus's mouth snap shut. All the practiced politeness, the gentle, unassuming demeanor, had vanished. In its place was an authority so absolute it seemed to change the very atmosphere around the table. Mr. Abernathy, who had been trying to shrink into his chair, sat up a little straighter, his corporate instincts sensing a sudden and dramatic shift in the power dynamic. James's fingers went to the simple brass clasp on the portfolio. He opened it. It was not filled with architectural renderings or faded photographs. It was filled with documents, thick, professionally bound reports, their covers emblazoned with a simple, elegant logo, a stylized H inside a circle. Harrison Holdings. He slid the top document across the table toward Mr. Abernathy. "My name is James Harrison," he said, his voice as cool and crisp as the document itself. "I am not a retired history teacher. That is a story my daughter and I have enjoyed for our own privacy. I am the founder and CEO of Harrison Holdings, a private equity firm." Abernathy's eyes widened as he picked up the document. His face, already florid, seemed to drain of all color. He read the title page, his mouth falling slightly open. This is the prospectus for the Omnicorp acquisition," he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Marcus stared, uncomprehending. Omnicorp? What are you talking about? What is this, some kind of joke? He looked at Clara, desperate for an explanation. Clara, what is he doing? Clara met his frantic gaze with her serene, pitying calm. He's telling the truth, Marcus. James Harrison's focus remained locked on Abernathy. It's no joke, Mr. Abernathy. As of 4:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this afternoon, my firm, Harrison Holdings, completed its acquisition of a 58% controlling interest in Omnicorp International. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Which means, as of 4:15 p.m. this afternoon, I am, for all intents and purposes, your boss, and your boss's boss. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and sound out of their corner of the restaurant. Marcus's face had gone from smug to confused to a mask of waxy, bloodless shock. He looked from James to Abernathy, who was staring at the portfolio as if it were a venomous snake, and then to Clara, his wife, the woman he had just called nothing. Her calm expression was suddenly the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. It was the calm of someone who knew everything, who had been standing on solid ground the entire time he had been tap dancing on a collapsing bridge. The acquisition was managed by one of my senior analysts, James continued, his voice relentless and even. He gestured with his head toward Clara. My daughter, Clara Harrison. It was her project from inception to completion. She identified Omnicorp as an undervalued asset nearly a year ago. She structured the deal. She conducted the due diligence. She ran the numbers. The work she has been doing from your apartment for the past 6 months would have earned her a partnership in any firm on Wall Street. He let that sink in. He let Marcus process the image of his simple wife, the woman he thought was planning menus and arranging flowers, quietly and methodically buying the entire corporate empire he was so desperate to climb. The architecture she was designing wasn't made of steel and glass. It was made of stocks and leveraged buyouts. The structure she was building was a new reality, and he was not part of the plan. The world had just tilted on its axis, and Marcus Thorne was in freefall. The life he thought he was building for her was a flimsy shack. The life she had been building in secret was a fortress, and he was on the outside. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of silent chaos. Marcus sat frozen, his face a ghastly shade of white, his mouth slightly agape. He looked like a statue memorializing the exact moment a man's world had shattered. Mr. Abernathy, a creature of pure corporate survival instinct, was already recalibrating. He pushed the prospectus back toward James Harrison with a trembling hand, his expression shifting from shock to a fawning, desperate eagerness to please. Mr. Harrison, sir, Abernathy stammered, his voice several octaves higher than before. I had no idea. This is monumental news. Congratulations. On behalf of Omnicorp, we are honored, truly honored. He shot a venomous look at Marcus, a look that said, you brought this catastrophe to my table. Mrs. Abernathy, who had looked upon Clara with such coolness, now regarded her with a mixture of awe and terror. She saw not the simple wife of a junior executive, but a woman of immense, hidden power, a queen in disguise. But James Harrison was not finished. He was a methodical man, and his purpose tonight was not just revelation, but education. He was here to hold up a mirror to Marcus Thorne, to force him to see the ugliness of his own reflection. This was the list of grievances, delivered not with heat, but with the chilling precision of a surgeon's scalpel. You believe a person's worth is tied to their name and connections, Marcus, James began, his voice still low, yet it commanded the attention of the entire table. You believe value is something you wear, something you drive, something you can display. You have spent your entire marriage trying to teach my daughter this lesson. Tonight, I'd like to offer a different perspective. He looked directly at Marcus, whose eyes were wide with a dawning horror. You called my daughter nothing. This nothing woman holds a master's degree in architecture from one of the finest universities in the country, from which she graduated summa cum laude. This nothing woman won the prestigious Chandler Prize for Architectural Innovation at the age of 27. This nothing woman put her own brilliant career on hold to support yours, a sacrifice you treated as her duty. And this nothing woman just orchestrated a corporate takeover that will be the talk of the financial world for the next 6 months. He paused, letting each point land. So you see, Marcus, my daughter is not nothing. My daughter is, and has always been, everything. You were just too blind to see it. He then turned his attention to his own perceived inadequacy in Marcus's eyes. You dismissed me as a simple, retired teacher. You felt embarrassed by my car, my clothes, my quiet life. You were so worried I would not be presentable tonight. He smiled, a cold, thin smile devoid of all humor. Let me be clear. I am not embarrassed by my life. I was a history teacher for 5 years after I left the Army. I loved it. I left that profession to build my company from the ground up. But I have always considered my time as a teacher to be some of the most valuable work I have ever done. You judge a man by the label on his suit. I judge him by the content of his character. And by that measure, Marcus, you are bankrupt. The word bankrupt hung in the air. It was a word Marcus understood. It was the worst possible state of being in his lexicon. James Harrison finally turned his gaze back to the terrified Mr. Abernathy. As part of the post-acquisition restructuring, Harrison Holdings will be streamlining Omnicorp's management to eliminate redundancies and improve efficiency. My daughter's analysis, he nodded again toward Clara, has identified several divisions where the leadership is bloated and underperforming. He reached into the portfolio and pulled out another, slimmer document. He slid it over to Abernathy. That is the preliminary restructuring plan for your division. You'll notice the position of Vice President of Acquisitions has been deemed redundant. The entire team will be consolidated under our existing Strategic Assets Department. He looked back at Marcus, his face impassive. Your position, Marcus, and in fact your entire career path at this company, is being eliminated, effective immediately. This was the final blow. It wasn't just humiliation, it was annihilation. The promotion he had debased himself for was not just denied, it had ceased to exist. The career he had built his entire identity around had been erased with a single sentence. Marcus finally broke. A choked, guttural sound escaped his throat. He turned to Clara, his eyes pleading, frantic. "Clara, baby, please," he stammered. "I didn't mean it. You know I didn't mean it. It was just the pressure. I was trying to impress them. For us. For the baby." Clara looked at him, and for the first time, she felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even the lingering ghost of love. There was only a vast, empty space where her feelings for him used to be. The man she thought she had married had never really existed. He was a fiction. This desperate, groveling stranger was the reality. "The man I want to raise my child with needs to have integrity, Marcus," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. "Not just ambition. He needs to know how to treat people with respect, not because of what they can do for him, but because it's the right thing to do. He needs to see the value in a person, not the price tag on their life." She took a deep breath. "That man is not you. It's over, Marcus." Her words were quiet, but they were a final judgment. He had called her nothing, and in the end, that is what she had left him with. Nothing. The chaos that followed was a slow, agonizing unraveling. Marcus, stripped of his job, his ambition, and his wife in the span of 10 minutes, seemed to shrink in his expensive suit. He tried to speak again, to plead, but the words wouldn't come. He just stared at Clara, his face a mask of pathetic desperation. The architect of his own ruin, surveying the rubble. Mr. Abernathy, ever the pragmatist, was already in full damage control mode. his loyalty shifting as fluidly as the stock market. "Mr. Harrison, Miss Harrison," he said, practically bowing in his seat. "This is a bold new direction, a welcome one. We at Omnicorp, well, at what was Omnicorp, stand ready to assist in the transition in any way possible." He completely ignored Marcus, who was now as relevant to him as a discarded cocktail napkin. It was then that Eleanor Thorne, Marcus's mother, made her move. Throughout the devastating revelation, she had been sitting in stunned, horrified silence. Her perfectly constructed world of social hierarchies had been upended. The simple, inconsequential in-law was a titan of industry. The daughter-in-law she had condescended to was a financial prodigy. Her own son was a disgraced, unemployed fool. Her mind, racing to find a foothold in this new reality, seized on the one thing she thought she still had leverage with: the baby. She turned to Clara, her face a carefully constructed mask of grandmotherly concern. "Clara, my dear," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "let's not be hasty. Think of the child. A baby needs its father. It needs a family. Whatever foolish things Marcus has said, he is still the father of your baby." She was trying to weave a net of guilt and obligation, to pull Clara back into the fold through emotional blackmail. Clara looked at her mother-in-law, the woman who had sat silently, nodding in agreement, as her son verbally dismantled his wife. She saw no genuine concern in Eleanor's eyes, only a desperate attempt to salvage her family's social standing. This was not about the baby, it was about the bloodline, the connection to the newfound Harrison power and wealth. Clara's response was as calm and cutting as her father's had been. "You are right, Eleanor. My child will need a family that values honesty, kindness, and integrity, a family that builds people up instead of tearing them down for sport." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "You sat there tonight and endorsed his cruelty. You have spent years making me feel small, making my family feel inadequate. You are not the kind of influence I want in my child's life." It was a clean, sharp cut. Clara was severing not just her marriage, but the entire toxic family system that had enabled Marcus's behavior. Eleanor recoiled as if struck. The silent enabler had been called to account, and she had no defense. James Harrison, seeing that his daughter had taken full command of the situation, decided it was time to bring the evening to a close. He stood up, placing a hand gently on Clara's shoulder. "I believe we are finished here," he said to the table at large. He dropped a black credit card on the table, a card with no name, only the simple H logo. "The meal is taken care of. And Mr. Abernathy," he said, his gaze sharp, "I expect a full transition plan on my desk by Monday at 9 a.m. My office will be in touch." He then looked at Marcus, a final, parting glance that held not anger, but a profound and sorrowful pity. "You had a diamond in your hand, son, and you treated it like a common stone. A lesson for you to contemplate in your newfound free time." With that, he and Clara turned and walked away. They moved through the hushed restaurant, Clara's head held high, her father's hand a steady presence on her back. They didn't look back. They were walking away from the wreckage, toward a future Clara was now free to design on her own terms. Left behind at the table, Marcus finally broke completely. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. Mr. and Mrs. Abernathy, eager to escape the radioactive fallout, made their excuses and fled, leaving Marcus and his mother alone in the wreckage of their evening. Eleanor stared at her weeping son, her own face a mixture of fury and despair. The perfect life they had been building, the status they had worshipped, had all been a mirage. The real power, the real worth, had been sitting across the table from them the entire time, and they had been too blind and too arrogant to see it. They were left with nothing but the bill for a meal they couldn't afford and the bitter taste of poetic justice. The months that followed were a period of profound reconstruction for Clara and of slow, painful deconstruction for Marcus. The story of the dinner at Aurelia and the stunning revelation of James Harrison's identity became a quiet legend in financial circles, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms about the dangers of arrogance. Clara, free from the oppressive weight of Marcus's ambition and his mother's judgment, blossomed. She moved out of the apartment they had shared, the minimalist monument to his taste, and into a bright, airy loft overlooking the river. It was a space she designed for herself, filled with light, books, and the vibrant green of dozens of plants. She took her father up on his original offer and officially launched Harrison Architectural Design, with Harrison Holdings as her first and most significant client. Her first project was not a skyscraper or a luxury condominium complex, but the design of a new, state-of-the-art pediatric wing for the city's public hospital, fully funded by a new foundation her father had established in her and her future child's name. She poured all of her creative energy into the project, her mind alive with ideas for healing spaces, for rooms filled with natural light and colors that soothed and inspired. She was no longer just an architect, she was a creator of sanctuaries. Her pregnancy advanced, and with it, her own sense of peace and purpose grew. She was often seen on the construction site, a hard hat perched over her elegant hair, her hand resting on her belly, a picture of strength and grace. She was building a legacy, not of wealth, but of wellness. Marcus, meanwhile, experienced the swift and brutal reality of a fall from grace. His name was toxic. Abernathy, in an act of self-preservation, had made sure everyone knew that Marcus Thorne was the man who had insulted a billionaire's daughter to her face. The high-paying jobs at prestigious firms were no longer an option. His calls went unreturned. The friends who had once flocked to his parties now crossed the street to avoid him. He was forced to sell the apartment, his luxury car, and the expensive watches he had once prized as markers of his success. He ended up in a small, generic rental in a faceless suburban complex, working a tedious, low-level analyst job at a small insurance company, the kind of job he would have openly mocked a year earlier. The loss of status was a crushing blow, but it was the loss of Clara that truly hollowed him out. Alone in his sterile apartment, surrounded by the silence of his new life, he was forced to confront the truth of who he was. Without the external validation of his job, his wealth, and his curated social life, there was very little left. He replayed the dinner at Aurelia over and over in his mind, his own words echoing back at him with horrifying clarity. "You're nothing without me." He saw now that the opposite had been true. He had been the one who was nothing, a hollow man propped up by a woman whose substance he had been too shallow to recognize. About a month before Clara's due date, a letter arrived at her new office. It was from Marcus. Her first instinct was to throw it away, but something made her pause. The handwriting on the envelope was his, but it seemed different, less confident, more deliberate. She opened it. The letter was not what she expected. There were no excuses, no pleas for a second chance, no attempts to justify his behavior. It was a simple, stark, and deeply honest apology. "Clara," it began, "I know that I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I am not writing to do so. Forgiveness is something I have to earn from myself, and I am a long way from that. I am writing to say that you were right. About everything. I have spent the last few months living in the world I built, and I have found it to be an empty and lonely place. I was a fool, blinded by the shallowest and most meaningless things. I had a life of true value with you, and I destroyed it because I was too weak and insecure to see it. I don't expect you to believe me, but the man who wrote this letter is not the man from that dinner. At least, he is trying not to be. Losing you, and losing the life we had, was devastating, but losing my own self-respect was worse. I am trying to find it again, to build a character worthy of that word. My only request is not for me, but for our child. I know I have forfeited my right to be your husband, but I hope, one day, You might allow me the chance to earn the right to be a father. On your terms. Entirely. I will wait as long as it takes. If you decide that is not possible, I will understand and respect your decision. You are a wonderful person, Clara. You were never nothing. You were always everything. Yours, Marcus. Clara read the letter twice, her hand resting on her belly. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of genuine remorse. The old Marcus would have tried to manipulate, to charm, to bargain. This letter was an act of surrender. It was the first truly honorable thing he had done. She didn't feel a rekindling of love, but she did feel a flicker of something else. A sliver of hope that the father of her child might one day be a man his son or daughter could respect. It was a start, a foundation, however small, on which something new might be built. The day Clara's son was born, the pediatric wing she designed was nearing completion. She named him James, after her father. He was a beautiful, healthy baby with her calm eyes, and she hoped, her father's quiet strength. She lay in the private hospital room, a standard room, not a luxury suite, holding her son, feeling a sense of peace that was deeper and more profound than any she had ever known. Her father came to sit with her, his face etched with a love so immense it seemed to fill the room. He looked down at his grandson, his namesake, sleeping in his mother's arms. "He looks like you," James said softly. "He has your hands," Clara replied, gently stroking the baby's tiny, perfect fingers. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the baby sleep. The chaos of the past year felt a world away. The drama, the anger, the humiliation. It had all served its purpose. It had cleared the way for this peace, for this new life. "I heard from Marcus," Clara said finally, her voice low. "He wrote me a letter." James nodded, his expression unreadable. "And?" "It was different," she said. "He wants to be a father, on my terms." "What do you want to do?" her father asked. It wasn't a test, it was a genuine question. He had cleared the obstacle from her path. Now the path itself was hers to choose. Clara looked down at her son. Her love for him was a fierce, protective shield. But she knew that shield could not be so hard that it blocked out the world entirely. A boy needed a father, but he needed a father who was worthy of the title. "I want our son to have a father," she said, thinking aloud. "But I will not allow him to have a bad one. I will allow supervised visits. I will give Marcus the opportunity to prove he has changed, but he will have to earn it. Every single day. My son's well-being is my only priority. Revenge is a poison. I'm interested in building, not destroying." James Harrison looked at his daughter, and his heart swelled with pride. She had faced down arrogance and cruelty, not with more cruelty, but with strength, grace, and wisdom. She had not become her enemy. She had maintained her moral high ground, her essential goodness. She had won, but more importantly, she had won in the right way. "That sounds like a very good plan," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A very wise plan." A few weeks later, Clara stood in the completed atrium of the James Harrison Jr. Pediatric Wing. The space was magnificent. A soaring glass ceiling allowed sunlight to pour in, illuminating a vibrant mural of forests and friendly animals. The air was filled with the quiet hum of a state-of-the-art air filtration system and the gentle sound of a small water feature in a sensory garden. It was a space designed for hope. She held her son in her arms, rocking him gently. Her father stood beside her, looking up at the ceiling. "It's your best work yet, Clara," he said. "It's our best work, Dad," she corrected him gently. She thought about worth. For so long, Marcus had tried to define her worth for her. He had measured it in dollars, in social connections, in the brand of her shoes. He was wrong. True worth wasn't something someone else could give you or take away. It wasn't a reflection in the mirror of society's expectations. It was a foundation built within yourself, brick by brick, with acts of integrity, kindness, and courage. It was the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. It was the fierce, unconditional love for a child. It was the strength to walk away from what was broken and the vision to build something beautiful and new in its place. Her life was her own design now, and it was a masterpiece. What an incredible journey of strength and vindication. Clara showed us that true power isn't about wealth or status, but about integrity and self-worth. What do you think is the most important lesson from this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as satisfying as I did, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of justice and redemption. We'll see you in the next one.